So I recently made for a priest a large purchase, and it was of a new camera. And it kind of became like an obsession. I spent like hours online reading reviews. Has anyone ever done that about like something you're going to spend some money on, right? And there was, of course, the reviews that were like, this is the best thing ever. And then there was the reviews like, this is the worst thing ever. You're like, who do I trust, right? I just don't know anymore. And just looking and spending all that time, because we want to know, like, is it worth it, right? Like, how much does it cost, and is it worth it? And so we spend a whole lot of time doing that. But thank God for Amazon, right? It helps us out with that game, making sure that we get the best deal. So I finally found this package for this camera that I ended up purchasing, and I think it was a pretty good deal for the camera. But as I was reflecting on our gospel tonight, I started to realize that that question of how much does it cost starts to come into my spiritual life in not a good way. How much does it cost becomes a question I sometimes ask when the Lord presents me with the true cost of discipleship. When he says the real cost of being my disciple is that quite possibly your family is going to hate you, and really lots of things could possibly go real wrong for you, and the world's going to persecute you and utter false things against you. And discipleship in the beginning may sound fun, come and follow me, until we realize as disciples that where we're going is with him and our cross to Calvary. The cost of discipleship becomes real eventually in the Christian life for all of us. When he says, unless you're willing to die with me, to take up your cross daily and go where I went before you, then you can't be my disciple. That's when most of us say, okay, Jesus, you're crazy, I'm out, right? When he invites us in to share his suffering, when he invites us in to share the pain of the sins of the world with him, that's when all of us say, I thought this was so that we could be somehow happy in this life and eternally happy in the next, right? But really in our gospel today, he says that's not really what discipleship's all about. Discipleship is about, at any cost, laying down our life for the Lord. But sometimes the cost is rather high, and sometimes we don't want to pay that cost to be his disciples. There was an experience last Christmas that I want to share with you. It was a time where the Lord asked me to pay up with my own pride, to sacrifice that, to lay that down. And so it was Christmas Day. It was nice, Christmas Day. So imagine that. I'm outside after Mass shaking hands with people. They're like, oh, Merry Christmas, Father. And I'm like, oh, Merry Christmas to you. It was really nice. And anyways, this lady comes up to me afterwards, and she doesn't say Merry Christmas to me. All she does is point at my stomach, and she says, Father, you're starting to look like all those other priests. And I was on Christmas Day, right, mind you, and I was like, excuse me? I was kind of taken off guard by it, and she's like, yeah, you're looking quite like all those other priests. And I was like, okay. So basically she called me fat, right, on Christmas Day, which is not a great Christmas present from your people, right? You want to be like, oh, Father, you're so great. No, thank you so much. So anyways, that's not a good way to my heart, okay? And so I kind of started to hold a little bit of a grudge against this lady. And, Irish and grudges, right? We'll hold them for 1,000 years before we forgive you, right? And hopefully into eternity, okay? So anyways, there I am, and I kind of did everything in my power not to slap her in the moment. But I didn't, because I was like, it's Christmas. I'm not going to take out this lady. So anyways, she goes away. I kind of push her down I was like, no, we're not dealing with this right now. I'm going to shake hands with people who want to appreciate me. 4 months later, I get a phone call from her husband saying that my wife is at Hoag Hospital, and she's dying from stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Will you come and will you anoint her? And in my heart, I was like, she can die in her sins. That's how deep it goes, guys. That's how deep it goes. We're dark inside, some of us, right? Especially me. And then the Lord said this thing to me. He says, not about you. He says, Tim, she doesn't need you right now. She needs me. Go. And so I swallowed my pride. That day it cost my pride. And I got in the car, I drove 30 minutes to Hoag, I paid $5 to park, and I went up 7 stories or whatever to the ICU. I forgave her sins, I anointed her, and I prepared her to be met by the Lord. And that day was a day I realized the true cost of what it means to be a disciple. That sometimes it's uncomfortable for us, and sometimes it means telling ourselves no. And actually, to be honest with you guys, most of the time, it ends up telling ourselves no. The question of discipleship is, how much are we willing to say no to ourselves so that someone next to us could have life? And Jesus came not only to free us from sin on the cross, but to show us an example of what discipleship really means, to show us the cost of it. And if I'm honest, what I would really like to do sometimes when the Lord invites me to an opportunity to suffer for him, is I'd like to look on the reviews of Amazon if it's worth it, right? But that's not the God we have. He proves to us the worth it. He says, we complete, St. Paul says, this is a crazy statement in the scriptures, that we complete what is lacking in the sufferings of Christ. Guys, there's nothing lacking in the sufferings of Christ except for our participation in it. And that's the invitation of discipleship, that we would be willing to enter it when invited to enter the passion. One little other story about another way that the Lord has invited me to renounce my own safety and comfort for another. So recently, I got a phone call from the Vicar General, which is never a good thing. And so he called and I answered, and I was on retreat with the kids. He said, do you want the good news first or the bad news first? And I was like, don't ever start a phone call like that, okay? And so I was like, the good news? It was the bad news. I was like, give me the bad news first. He's like, oh, the bishop that was the rector at St. Patrick's died. And I said, oh, that's pretty bad news. Yeah, that's sad, He says, how about the good news? And I was like, okay. He's like, the bishop has decided that he'd like to name you the head of healing and deliverance for the Diocese of Orange. I was like, that's not good news. Like, what is that, right? And I had been part of this ministry some years before in my internship year as a seminarian. So the healing and deliverance ministry in the diocese is basically the priests who handled the exorcisms, minor and major, and we manage the cases and we pray. And so in my internship year, about 9 months before we had a major case, I started to get really sick, like bad sick, like undiagnosable sick. And so I had all these symptoms, and they were like mirroring the exact symptoms of like colon cancer. And so I went through all of the testing, went to all these different doctors. I was zapped of energy every single day, suffering a lot from this. And they went through all the things and could find nothing wrong with me. 3 months after I began to be sick, I got a phone call to ask if I would help on this team. Weird, right? Didn't make the connection. 6 months later, we were in the major exorcism of this lady, and every pain that she was experiencing while she was there being exorcised was a pain that I was experiencing in my body at the same time. And they call this in the spiritual life sympathy, intercession, and it sucks, guys. It sucks a lot. And as soon as we were finished with that exorcism for this woman, the pain left and it never came back. Okay, sympathy, intercession is what the Christian life, I think, is all about. When Jesus invites us into that, he says, well, are you willing to suffer for me? And not just for me, but maybe for those around you. And when I got that call from the Vicar General saying that the bishop wanted to appoint me as that, what was my response? Yay! No, my response was, no, thank you. Because I was afraid. I was afraid to hurt again. I was afraid to have to suffer again. I was afraid to have to protect my family with prayers like I've never done before, And when the Lord starts demanding your life of you is when discipleship gets real. So we want to know tonight that the promise of discipleship is not just that we die on the cross with Jesus, but that is a vehicle to freedom in our own lives. So that when we can say no to ourselves, yes to him, to die to ourselves, to live for the other, is really when discipleship's cost brings forth the largest fruit of the salvation of the world.